Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. Whatever time you're joining, I just want to say welcome as we go into another Bible study. One of the things I want you also to put in your mind is that as you go through the Bible, there are many different types of stories. You have action-packed stories, you have love stories, you have stories, of course, that you would say involve miracles, things that basically are supernatural. You have all the stories that you need, however, to guide you on your daily path. There's nothing that you may come up with that if you actually think and search the Bible, that you would not be able to get some direction or some answers, even sometimes very specific into what you ought to do or how you are to overcome. Remember that the Bible is full of stories of people who have traveled this earth who are not perfect. But when you get to Hebrews 11, you'll realize that there are folks who are listed there who have overcame. And the reason they overcame was by their faith. Faith in who? Faith in God. Studying the Bible. Doing what God says. So the whole purpose of what we go through here is simply so that we'll have an understanding and be able to put what happened in the past in the perspective of how you would deal with it here now and also in the future. So here we're going to go into an action-packed story. It's about Abraham. And the last time we studied, you remember when they were splitting up, Lot decided he was going to choose what he would think was the better land, the fertile land, the flat, the plain. It was close enough to Sodom. Sodom was a big city, Sodom and Gomorrah. It would kind of remind you of a place like Las Vegas, where, all kinds of happenings and the lights and, it was the place where you could have quote unquote fun. Abraham retreated to the mountain. Wasn't much in the mountain. There wasn't any, nightlife in the mountain, one would say. All you had in the mountain was stars. But anyway, he gave Lot the choice, and Lot chose the fertile ground, the flat. In chapter 14, it goes into talking about an event, a war. There's a lot of names that are going to be actually, given, and the names itself aren't necessarily very important. I will apologize before as far as the pronunciation of the names. I'm not going to spend time to, delineate it. It says, and it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Sherolamer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and king of Bela, which is Zor. And all these joined together in the valley of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. And in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims in Ashtaroth, Karnaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Emims in Shaveh Kirishaim, and the Horites in their Mount Seir unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And they returned and came to Emishpah, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazaron Tamar. So here you find, again, being very specific. And one would have to ask, why all this specificity? Well, again, remember, the Bible is also a history book. And so, if one was just writing the Bible just off the cuff, there would probably be no need if, they're trying to deceive, to give you all this type of detail, but it does. It says in verse 8, and there went out the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the king of Admah and the king of Zeboim and the king of Bela, the same is Zor, and they joined battle with them in the valley of Siddim. So that was where the battle was being fought, in Siddim. And Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and with Tidal, king of nations, and the Amaphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings with 5. And the valley of Sidon was full of slime pits. And the king of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that returned fled to the mountain. Now, here it says, in the valley of Siddim, said there were slime pits, and the king of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell. When it says that they fled, of course, it's saying that, of course, they were trying to run away. When it says that they fell, it means that they were basically captured, or they succumbed to the war. They fell, and they that remained fled into the mountains. So the ones who escaped now went to the mountains. Very interesting to think that here it is, the place that Lot had initial choice to go, he chose not to. He went to where it was fertile, where it seemed to have been more easy. And it came that's where the war was fought, and they end up, those who actually tried to escape went up into the mountains. It says in verse 11, and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all the victuals, and went their way. And they took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. Now remember, Lot didn't initially go into Sodom. Lot went close to Sodom. But that's one of the things that happen when it comes to sin. You don't necessarily intend to get involved with the sinful acts. You just want to get close enough. You're not going to go and smoke or do drugs and that sort of stuff. You just want to be in the company of the cool kids. Yeah, you want to be like the cool kids. But you get close enough, and soon and very soon, when you check, you're actually now in with the cool kids. You're actually there in Sodom. That's how sin works. It's enticing, and it slowly draws you in. So here it says that, Lot, Abraham's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. He lost everything. The king took it. They lost the battle. It says, and there came one that had escaped and told Abraham the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Ishal, and brother of Anar. And these were confederate with Abraham, or Abraham at that time. And Abraham heard that his brother was taken captive. He armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. So Abraham, and where he was in the mountain, wasn't involved in this. And I can assume the reason was because of the humility, the humbleness. People who are farmers and, they're away, they're not into the bling bling. I mean, there's nothing that one would think of as far as, desirable that, they would necessarily need, because they're not necessarily showing all the things that they have. Nevertheless, for whatever reason, of course, Abraham and where he was, his territory was not involved. Abraham heard that, they captured your this time they call him his brother. We know that Lot is actually his nephew. So they captured him and they've taken his family. It says, now Abraham took men who were born in his household. He took 318 and pursued them unto Dan. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot, and his goods, and the woman also, and the people. So you can just imagine, you could say exciting, but war is never exciting. War is, terrible. It's frightful. Abraham, however, was successful. And his success wasn't by his own might, of course. Abraham was directed by God, and he chose to listen to God. And so he went and he was able to capture back his nephew, or his brother, as it was stated here, capture all the goods, and he brought them back again. And the king of Sodom, in verse 17, went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's dale. Now, here it goes into something that one can take time to study or look into, because it mentions a name that's not mentioned many times in the Bible. It says, as Abraham was coming, it says, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. Now, the Bible, when it says the Most High God, it's talking about, Jesus himself. It says that Melchizedek, or actually, it's talking about God. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. Again, you can see the reference, God, possessor of heaven and earth, God, the creator. It's given significance. And it says, and he blessed, and it says, blessed be the Most High God, which has delivered thine enemies into thy hand. And he gave him tithes of all. Now, thus far, we have never read anything about tithes. And so one would have to then continue the study in the Bible to see exactly what tithes, stand for and what is the purpose. And if you get to Malachi, Malachi is one that talks about tithes at the end. It says, will a man rob God? It says, yet he have robbed me. He have robbed me in tithes and in offering. There are many other things one can get from this whole scenario. And we'll continue to read and I'll put it together. It says, the king of Sodom said unto Abraham, give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. Abraham was utilized in freeing Sodom and Gomorrah and the other kings from the terrible tragedy and what would have eventually happened. They had lost the battle. They lost their resources. They lost their goods, their land, their jewelry. They lost everything. Abraham went out, and with God's guidance, he was able to overcome. So the king of Sodom now said, you know what? Just give me the people, and you can take the things. Just give me the people, and you can take all the wealth, all the riches. And listen to what Abraham said. And Abraham said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth. Abram, his name was eventually changed to Abraham. But anyway, it says that he lifted up his hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth. He gave praise not to himself, but to God for being the overcomer. Earlier on, you saw that he said he paid tithe to God. He paid tithe to the representative of God, Melchizedek, king of Salem. I want you to understand that all that we have belongs to God. All that we do, we should give credit to God, as long as it's being done, to God's honor and God's glory, and he gives us strength. Those who are doing evil, of course, it is the devil that, gets the credit for what they do. But the point I'm getting at is that we live in a society right now where there's so many people who use the gospel, they use the Bible as a means to make money. If they do something for you that has to do with God, they expect a return, even though it is God who has done it. If you remember the story, for those who know, have gone further later on in the Old Testament, of the prophet who gave the command to Naaman, go and dip in the water 7 times. When Naaman got healed, he was so happy for his healing that he went back to the prophet and tried to give him substance, give him wealth. The prophet said, no, 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 you can take it back with you. We need to realize that it is God who blesses us to be a blessing. So when somebody, tries to return it to us for us to take credit, we need to say, you know what? All glory goes to God. We live in a time where there's so many televangelists, so many, people who are extremely rich who calls themselves ministers or pastors, to the point where they will even cause distress upon the poor. They're flying in planes when there are people who they're shepherding are not even able to make it to the doorstep of their plane, or not even able to pay for their next meal, but they're giving. The point I'm saying is that we have to be very careful as leaders, ministers, people who are called by God, not to take credit, and especially financial credit, for what God has done through us. If you look at the Levites, the ones who were called to be the priests in the Old Testament, you find that they were not told to have things excess. They were supported by the people. They weren't given land as far as being, issued out. But the people on a whole provided for them. Now we have the reverse, where those who are in leadership, and especially at the higher end, they tend to have more than the ones who are the parishioners. It's almost like they put a tax on the people. But continuing, here's what Abraham said. Abraham said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to the shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abraham rich, save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshol, and Mamre. Let them take their portion. So this was a very interesting story, and one can just use the imagination to kind of see the scenery around. A couple kings came together. They overthrow Sodom and Gomorrah in addition to other kingdoms. The ones who escaped went up to the mountain and called a farmer, called Abraham, and said, listen, they've just taken your nephew captive, him and his family, along with actually the entire nation that he, was part of the community with. Abraham called his soldiers together. It says 318 of them. Said, let us go. God was with him. They went and they were able to overcome. Again, that's action pack. I mean, one can, I guess Hollywood can put together something that would kind of show what would have happened, but nevertheless, they overcame. The king of Sodom and Gomorrah was, of course, happy that, here it is that they are now getting back their freedom. They said to Abraham, listen, take all that you see, all that you have. Just let the people be able to return. Just give me the people, and you could take everything. And Abraham says, nah, you can keep all of that. I don't want you to say that it's because of you that I'm blessed. You see, Abraham knew that his blessing came from God. And he wanted to make sure that even the ones that he was able to help realize that his blessings came from God. He paid tithe. That's the first time tithe is mentioned. So you would have to go through the Bible to realize, to figure out, what does tithing mean? He gave tithe because of, of course, respect and understanding. And it would also indicate that, God had revealed to them what the expectation is when it comes down to the blessings that he received. God had told him about sacrifice, even in the Garden of Eden, when Cain and Abel, the first murder that occurred. We dealt with that very earlier on. Cain did not do what God says. Abel did. And so here, apparently at some point, tithing was initiated, and Abraham was faithful to his tithing. As we continue to study, I pray that God will reveal to you the things that he wants you to do, so you can listen and you can act in the positive ways that you see in Abraham or Abraham. Thank you very much. See you next time. It's been fun.